In this tutorial, we're going to show you how you can create text and all of the various options that we can use to edit text in the software. So let's go to File and Close. So let's go and create a new file. So in here, my job setup form, I'm going to specify a width of 20 inches, and have a height of 20 inches, and I'm going to set the XY position in the lower left hand corner and then press OK. So we're going to look at all of the text creation and text editing tools in the software. To access these, you can find them in the Drawing tab under Create Vectors, and in particular we're going to look at how we can draw text, how we can draw text within a vector box, how we can edit the text spacing and curve, how we can convert text to curves, and how we can wrap text along a curve. Towards the end of the session, we're also going to show you how you can use the Distort tool in order for you to distort text. So to begin with, let's go over to the Draw Text box here. So here is a box where we can enter our text in. So I could just simply type in some text. With the settings that we've got here, I can simply come into my space and just click in the white space, and you'll see it's entered the text that we've got in our text box, and it's created it based on the settings that we have here in the form. Now, not only can I type text into this box here, but if I was to copy text from another program, I could simply copy that and then come into the text box here, right mouse click, and use the option here to paste that text into this text box. If I wanted to look at a larger text box, I can simply use the larger edit here, and again you can see I can just type my text into here, or again I could just right click and look at pasting any text that I may have already had copied. So let's just cancel that. And so once you're happy with the text that you have in the text field, the next thing that you need to do is choose the type of font that you want to use. Now we've got two types of font. We have True Type and we have Single Line font. Now True Type font is any fonts that come pre-installed with Windows, or fonts that we may have installed into Windows. Now if you found a font that you like that's not available on your system, you can use the Windows help function to guide you through installing that font. Single line font are fonts that we've installed with the software package. For this example, I'm going to use a True Type font. I can currently see that at the moment we have Times New Roman selected. If I wanted to change that font, I simply press on this arrow, and that's going to show me a list of all of the fonts that I've got installed on my system. If I wanted to, I could use the slider bar to view all of those fonts. If I knew the name of a font that I was looking for, I could simply type in the name. For example, I want to find the font Arial, so I'm going to type in ARI, and you'll see now it's brought up all of the A's, and in particular it's actually highlighted the Arial font, so I could simply press enter on the keyboard to change that, and then I could go ahead and press apply to change the text there. Now if we were creating text for engraving purposes, you may want to use the single line font option. You'll see here we're displayed with a different list, and this shows all of the pre-installed single line fonts. Again, I could choose a different font. For example, let's choose Helvetica, then we could go ahead and press apply, and you'll see it now it's created the Vectric text as a single line font. And so these single line fonts are great for when using a conical engraving tool, as you can create a profile toolpath which goes down as deep as you specify along the vectors, producing a fast and efficient way for creating text for engraving purposes. Now for this example, I'm going to go back to the True Type font, go ahead and press apply. So you can see it's picked up Times New Roman as the font there. Now once you're happy with the font that you've got selected, there are various other options within the form in order for you to control the text that you're going to create. For instance, we can make the text bold by simply checking that box and then pressing apply. We could even make it italic. Again, check the box, press apply. We can choose where we align our text to. So at the moment it's in the centre, and this alignment is all based on the actual anchor point of the text. So this is where we actually clicked within our work area to apply the text to, and we can see the coordinates X here and Y there. So if we wanted to edit the alignment against our anchor point, we could simply use the left option, press apply, right, apply. In this case, we're going to go back to the centre, go ahead, press apply there. And then we also have the option here to edit the text height. So I may want to take this from 2.5 inches to 3 inches. Go ahead, press apply. We can see that change there. Once you're happy with everything that you've selected in the form and how the text actually looks, you can just close that form down. Now with that text highlighted, I'm going to press F9 on the keyboard. That's the shortcut key to centre an object to the centre of your job space. Now, as with any text that we create using the Draw Text tool, the software will treat this entity as a text object, and this allows us to make further edits to the text by using any of the text manipulation tools. Until we're comfortable with the text that we've got, we can then convert the text object to standard vectors. So with this text selected, let's go back into the Draw Text tool. And so we can see that the software knows that we want to edit this text, as it had that Vectric text highlighted there in the text box. So now what I can do is I can edit the text. I could add in more text if I wanted to. So for example, I want to add in a new line, so I'm just going to press return and I'm going to type the word software in there. And then if I wanted to, I could go ahead, press apply, and you'll see it's added that in. Now if I wanted to, I could look at unchecking bold, unchecking italic, just to see how that looks, press apply, and we can see it's updated the text based on the settings that we've got in the create text form. And so this really demonstrates the usefulness of the software, remembering it's a text object, that we can make further edits to the text once it's already been created. So let's just close that down and take that text. I'm just going to press delete on the keyboard to delete that text. Now we're going to look at demonstrating the draw text within Vector Box tool. As the name suggests, we need a box in order for us to put our text inside of. So to do that, we're going to come over to Create Vectors, draw a rectangle. In this case, we're going to go with a width of 16, a height of 6 in there. Go ahead, press create, and then we can close that down. I'm going to select that rectangle, and I'm going to press F9 on the keyboard, and that's going to center that in my job. Now with that rectangle selected, we can come over to this tool to draw text within a vector box. So here is where we enter our text that we'd like to put into our box. So we're going to type in Vectric, return, software, return for CNC. Just go with the settings that we have here, and then once we press apply, then we can see that the software has fitted the text specified in our text box as best as it can to the box that we had selected before we came into this form. And again, we can make edits to this text, so we could look at altering the font, we can make it bold, italic. We could change the text alignment if we wanted to, so we can make that left, press apply, we can make that right, press apply. We could just put that back into the centre there. Then we have the bounding box dimensions, and so this is actually picked up from the rectangle that we had selected. And we can look at overriding these dimensions by simply just inputting new values for the width and the height in there. Then we could look to alter in the margin size. This is basically the border between the text and the actual bounding box itself. So at the moment we've got it set to normal, so we've got a little bit of a gap between the text and the top and the bottom of our rectangle. If we set it to none and then press apply, you can see that the text is now filling the entire space. It's touching the top of that rectangle and the bottom of that bounding box there. And then if we put it to wide and then press apply, you'll see that we have a much wider border between the text and the box itself. So let's just put that back to normal and press apply. Two further options in the form here. We can alter the vertical stretch or the horizontal stretch. Now we're currently okay with the vertical space. We seem to be filling that just fine, but we may want to make use of the horizontal space here. So we can come down. We've got three different options here to alter that. So you can alter the spaces, the kerning, or the characters. So let's just look at stretch characters. Go ahead, press apply. And so we can see what it's done. It's took that text and it's stretched those characters within the margins of the box that we've got specified here. So as you can see, this is a very useful way to constrain text to a box, and this would be handy if you were making plaques or signs. So let's just close that down. I'm just going to box select these vectors. I'm just going to hit delete on the keyboard to delete those. The next tool we're going to look at is this tool here, Edit Text Spacing and Curve. So before I can use this tool, I need some text to edit. So let's go into the Draw Text option, and in here I'm just going to type in my text. So I'm going to type in Vectric and software. Just going to go the defaults that we've got here, press apply, close that down, select that text, and then we're going to press F9 on the keyboard to center that in the center of my job. So the way that the software creates text is all down to the rules of the individual fonts. So you may find that the spacing between each of these characters isn't always equal to each other, and the same also applies to the height of the text, and that's all down to the fonts themselves. But what we can do is we can come over and use the Edit Text Spacing and Curve tool to edit these to our own liking. So if we click to enable that, and so you'll see that when I bring my cursor over my text, the cursor changes, and I'm presented with two arrows that are pointing towards each other. So that's telling me that if I click now, we're going to bring the two characters closer together. For example, if I click, you'll see that we're bringing the V and the E closer together. To send characters further apart, all I do is I simply hold down Shift, and you'll see now that the arrows are pointing away from each other. So when I click now, you'll see that we're increasing the space between two characters there. And if I wanted to increase the spacing by greater increments, I could simply hold down Control whilst I click. For instance, let's do this with the C and the T. So if I hold down Control and click, you'll see that it's bringing those closer together in much bigger increments. Again, to send them away from each other, hold down Shift so the arrows are pointing away, Control for the bigger increments, and you'll see that spacing increase there. So let's just bring these back together by using the Control option like so. And so what we'll do is we'll just go through each of the space in between the characters increasing or decreasing until we were okay with the way that it looked. So for example, the R and the I here, I'm going to look at increasing that spacing like so, maybe with the T and the R, the C and the T, and you just work through each one of those until you're happy with the space. If we go to the word software, you can see we can bring the S and the O close together, so just click there to bring those close together, bring the O and the F closer together, and this really is a useful feature to use, especially when we have serifs that are quite close together, for example the F and the T here. So to bring them further apart, hold down Shift, click just to bring those further apart, between the T and the W, Shift to bring those further apart. We might want to bring the W and the A closer together. Now because we have two lines in our text block, you'll notice that when I hover my mouse between the two words, between Vectric and software, we now have the option to increase the spacing between the two words there. You'll see that the arrows are pointing at each other, so I can click to bring those closer together, and I can simply hold down Shift to move them further apart. And the same applies again if we hold down Control. I can decrease that spacing in bigger increments by holding down Control whilst I click, like so. And then we could do the same to decrease the space between the lines. So I'm just going to hold down Control and Shift just to change that direction, and I can just click and increase the space in there. And so you just increase or decrease the space in between the characters, between the lines, until visually it looks better. Now, if our text was in single lines, we could look at editing the curvature of the text whilst in Edit Text mode. So to do that, what we could do is we could right click on the text, and you'll see we've got the option here to break text block into lines. So let's do that, and you'll see now that we now have two separate entities there. So you'll see that we're presented with two green nodes, and we've got a white handle in the center there. So that handle just simply enables me to move my text around. And then the green handle at the top here allows me to create some curvature in my text. And then the green handle at the bottom just brings the curve down like so. We can put that back into the center there. So let's just put the Vectric word into a curve. So just going to pull on that handle. And so one thing you may notice is that when we increase that curvature, or even when we just create a curve in this mode, you'll notice that the space in between each of these letters is going to change. And whilst we're still in Edit Text Spacing mode, I can still edit the spacing between each of those characters. So I'm just going to click to bring the V and the E closer together, bring the C and the T closer together, T and R. Now I might want to increase the space in here, so I'm going to hold down Shift, and I can see the arrows are pointing away from each other, so we're just going to increase that space in there. And now, since that we've created that curve, you may have noticed that we have an additional set of nodes. So we've got two red nodes here, and we've got two blue nodes here. So what are these? So the red node enables me to move my text along that curve like so, and if I click to select it again, but this time also hold down Control, I can now move this text along the curve in increments of 15 degrees. So let's bring that back. Now the blue node enables me to edit the radius that the text is currently sitting on. So for instance, we can increase that radius, or we could bring it closer together until it's a full circle. So let's just put that up to here. So there we have plenty of options to edit the text spacing and curve. Now it's important to note here that before you even get to this stage where you're editing the space in between characters, creating curvature for your text, it's a good idea to make sure that the text content and the font itself is correct, because if you wanted to go back in and edit the text, then we'd lose any formatting that we've applied to this text, so the spacing and the curvature. So let's see what I mean by that. So with that text still selected, we're going to come over to Draw Text, and if I just select that text, you'll see that it's remembered, it's recognised that Vectric text, but if I make any form of change to this form, we're going to lose all of that formatting. For example, if I wanted to include the word LTD at the end and then go ahead and press apply, you'll see it's just defaulted back as if it were a new piece of text. So it's really important to make sure that when we are creating text in the first place, we're sure of the content and the settings that we have before we go ahead and make those edits. Now if we found ourselves in a position where you didn't mean to make those changes, or you didn't like those changes, we could simply just come up to this option here, we can undo that, and it will bring it back to the state it was in before we made that change. And so we can keep doing this to undo every state that we've changed to the text using the text editing tools. Now imagine that we've exhausted the use of all of the text editing tools that we've used so far. We may now just want to use the tools that are available to us if these were standard vectors. And so what we can do is we can look at this option here to convert objects to curves. And so with that text selected, if we use that option there, what happens is the text is no longer a text entity, and instead it's just a set of individual vectors. And so the software will no longer see this as a text object. For example, if I select the text there and we come into draw text like we have done previously, you'll notice it hasn't picked that up because it's not a text object. It's now a set of individual vectors. And so this has enabled me to edit the individual letters as a standard vector. For instance, I could take the letter S here and we could look at making that bigger, and this is something that we couldn't do using the text editing tools here. If I wanted to go a stage further, I could go into node edit mode, just zoom in there. You can see that we can insert a new point here. I could just make that bigger. I could smooth that point if I wanted to. Then we could look at just really transforming the shape of that letter that we've got there. So let's put this back into normal transform mode. We'll just use the option here to zoom to fit. And again, if we felt like we wanted to go back to having the software word as a text entity, we could just simply use the undo option. So we could undo the node editing, and then we could simply undo the size of that. If we select it, we can still see that we have individual vectors there. So let's undo that one more time. And you'll see now that we're back to a state where this word is now a text entity. And so I could take that text, we could go back into the draw text option, and you'll see that the software has recognised this as a text entity that we could go in and make further edits to. So let's just close that down. Some of the functions in the software require us to not have overlapping vectors. This is especially true when it comes to toolpathing. However, sometimes this cannot be helped, and this can be down to the type of font that we may be using. For example, with that text selected, if we go over to Draw Text, and I'm going to change the font to a brush script font, so I'm just going to use a drop down option there, and I'm going to type in BRU, and you'll see it's highlighted that, so I'm just going to press enter to apply that there. I'm also going to alter the text height. I'm going to make that 4 inches, press apply, press close. And so you'll see the type of font that we have. We've got tails going to and from the next character. And this is where overlapping can be quite a problem. Now there are things in the software that we can do to overcome this issue. So what we can do is we can look at converting the text to curves. Let's come over there, convert to curves. So now working with individual vectors. Now if we zoom in here, we can see the vectors where they're overlapping. Now some of the actual toolpaths, for example V-carving, if we were to actually V-carve this text, it would require us to use one continuous vector to cut in between. And so what we might want to do is look at welding these characters together to create one continuous vector. So to do that, I'm just going to hold down Shift to deselect the S, and then I'm going to deselect all of the inner vectors. I don't want to lose those, so we're just going to hold down Shift, select each of those like so, and with the outer vectors selected there, we can come over and we can look at welding them together. And so you'll see that we've actually lost the overlapping vectors and we're left with one continuous vector there. Now sometimes with script font where the vectors originally overlapped, we may be left with a few inconsistencies. For example, if I just zoom in on the A and the R there, you can see where the two overlapped. We now have a little kink in the actual vector itself. So this may require a little bit of tweaking, where we'll look at node editing to just smooth these vectors out. So with that vector selected, let's come over to node edit, and I can simply just right click on that point, delete it, right click on that point also, then we could look at deleting that one. So we go delete that, zoom in there, we'll delete these ones here, so right click, delete, right click, delete that point, and when we zoom out you can see it looks a lot better than what it did before. So let's use the option here to zoom to fit. So now we're going to look at another option where we can wrap text along a curve. So I'm just going to put this into normal selection mode. I'm just going to select everything there. I'm just going to hit delete on the keyboard to delete that text. So now let's go ahead and create some text. So in here I'm going to type the word software in here. I'm going to choose my font. I want Arial, so I'm going to type in ARI, and there it's found it there. So I'm going to select that. Text height, we want that to be 2 inches. Press apply, close that down, and we'll select that text, press F9 on the keyboard to center that to our job. Now what I'd like to do is just create a curve. So we're going to come over to this option here to draw a curve, and I'm simply just going to input some points to create the curve there. Right mouse click to come out of that, and so then I'm going to select my text, hold down shift and select the curve that I'd like to wrap my text along, and then we're going to come over to create vectors, and we're going to use the option to wrap text along curve. Okay, so let's open up this form. We've got lots of different options in here. If I just press apply just to see what happens, and then we'll walk through the form and we'll talk about all of the different options there. So we can see at the moment the text is actually upside down back to front, and the reason for that is that we currently have text on the other side switched on. So if we just deselect that, you'll see it updates and it's now in the correct view there. We have the option to choose text position, whether that's above the curve, on the curve or below the curve. At the moment it's currently sat on the curve, so it's just following the curve at the centre of the text. If we use the option below curve, you'll see that the text will sit underneath that curve, and if we have above curve, the text will sit above the curve like so. Then we have the option text on the other side, so we saw that earlier, and then we can choose an offset distance. So this is a distance that we can apply to offset it from the curve that we've got selected here. For example, we could offset that by 1/2 inch, and you'll see it will update there. We could also apply negative offsets, so let's type in negative 0.5 and it will just bring that down by 0.5. In this case we're just going to go with 0, and you'll see it just automatically updates. Then we can choose how we align the text to the curve. At the moment we can currently see it's in the middle, so it's going to take up the middle portion of the curve. We could also look at left aligning, that's going to move everything over to the left hand side, and opposite of that we could go over to the right hand side like so. Let's put that back in the middle. Then we have 2 options at the bottom, align to curve, so this is where the actual text itself follows the curvature of the curve that we're aligning it to, and that's what we can currently see there. Or alternatively we could look at keeping the text vertically, and you'll see that the text is stood vertical but it's still following the curvature of that curve that we have there. So let's just put that back to align to curve. Now up the top here we have the option to alter the text size. At the moment it's maintaining its text size. We do have the option here to scale text to fill the curve, so if I select that you'll see it just fills the entirety of that curve there. Let's just put that back to maintain its original text size. Then we can alter the text spacing, so I could look at increasing that spacing if I wanted to, or I could look at decreasing it, sending it back to where it was. So I like what we've got there. However, what I would like to do is just go in and edit the individual character spacing. We can't do that in this form. So let's just close that down, and I'm going to come back over to edit text spacing and curve, in which case I can come over each of these letters once I've selected that word, and I could just decrease the space in between the letters like so. Here I could look at increasing, so holding down shift to increase that spacing, and you can see that every time I'm making an edit, it's still following the curvature of the curve that we originally aligned that text to. So I like the way that this looks. Now the next thing that I'd like to demonstrate is how we can wrap text around a circle. So let's go into normal selection mode, select the text, shift and select the curve, hit delete on the keyboard. So now we're going to look at drawing our circle. So we're going to give that a diameter of 10 inches, press create and close. Select that circle, F9 to centre that, and now we need some text. So let's go and draw some text. So here we're going to type in Vectric and software. I'm going to go with Arial font in the centre, text height is going to be 2, press apply, close that down. Let's just bring that into the centre there, so I'm just going to take that and snap that to the centre of our job. Now what I'd like to do is break this text into 2 separate lines. So if we right click on that text, use the option break text block into lines, so now I have one text there and I've got another text entity down there. Now when we wrap text around a circle or any closed shape, there's no way for the software to determine where it is that you want the text to begin wrapping from. Now in this example, I'd like the word Vectric to wrap along the top of the circle and the word software to wrap along the bottom of the circle here. Now the way that the text wraps itself along the vector is all down to the start point. Now if we take a look at this circle, if we put that in node edit mode, I can see the start point here is at the top and we're going in this direction here. And so the word Vectric would be wrapped going in an anti-clockwise motion around the circle. In this case, because I want to wrap both the word Vectric and software, I'm going to need to look at breaking this circle into 2 separate entities. So to do that, we need to look at cutting this circle in 2. I can do that in node edit mode. So we're going to look at cutting this node here. So I'm going to right click on that node, cut vector, and I'm going to come over to this one over here, right click, cut vector there. You can see that I have one vector at the bottom. My start point is on the left hand side, going in a direction from left to right, and then my top circle start point is on the left hand side also, and it's travelling in a direction going from left to right also. Now for the purpose of this example, I'm just going to right click on this node here, and I'm actually going to make this the start point, and you'll see why later on. So now that I've got my 2 arcs, we're now ready to actually look at wrapping the text to those 2 arcs to create the overall circle wrap. So let's go over to edit objects. I'm going to put that in normal selection mode, and so I'm going to take that text, shift and select the curve that I want to wrap the software text to. Come over to wrap text along curve, and then let's just apply this to see how it looks. So you can see it's wrapped that along the curve. Let's put it below the curve, so that's why the text is underneath that curve. That's exactly what I wanted there. Got it aligned to the middle, and we're aligning the text to the actual curve itself. If I wanted to, I could look at decreasing the spacing of the text. Okay, maybe that's a little bit too much, so I might just take that back up, and I'm happy with the way that that looks, then we could just close that down. So now I would like to look at the word Vectric and this curve here, so I'm going to hold down shift, go back into text on a curve, and if we just go ahead and press apply, we can see how that looks. Okay, now you'll see that it's going in the wrong direction. Now you'll remember I changed the start point of this curve from the left to the right, so that's why we're seeing that the way that it is now. Now one thing that we could do is we could go back and edit the start point, make that over here, or we could just simply look at putting the text on the other side and that will fix that. But now it's sat below that curve as that's what it's set to. So now we just need to change it so it's sat above the curve like so. So then we could go ahead and just close that down. Now it's important to note again that now that we've made changes to the text, we've formatted it, we've now wrapped it along a circle, any changes that we make to the actual text itself, for example, if I wanted to come back in here and I decided actually I want this to be in lowercase text, if I go ahead and press apply, we're going to lose all of that formatting that we've just done to the text. And so it's important again to make sure that you're happy with everything right at the start before you go ahead and make formatting changes to the actual text itself. So let's close that down. I'm just going to select everything here, we'll just delete it. So let's go and create some text. So in the text box I'm going to type the word Vectric in here. Font, Arial, text alignment in the centre, text height. Let's make that 3 inches, press apply and close. I have that text selected, let's press F9 in the keyboard to position that in the centre of my job space. And so with that text entity we can look at altering the shape, the heights of it, just like we would with any other vector. So to do that we simply put it into transformation mode. So we've already got our text selected, let's select it again, that will put it into transformation mode, and you'll see now that I have access to all of these handles here, whereby I could just move my text around my job if I wanted to by selecting it and moving it. I could look at altering the size if I wanted to, so I could grab any of these handles to shrink that text down, stretch it up, bring it up there, alter the size by pulling on a corner like so. We also have the option to size from the centre point, so to do that you simply hold down Shift while selecting a handle. You'll see now it's sizing that about the centre point like so. So that's on a corner. You also have it on the top like so, and on the sides. You'll see that I have these blue handles on each corner here. If I select one of those, that just enables me to rotate that about the centre point, which in this case is in the dead centre of our text. And so you can see there's lots of different ways that we can really transform the size and shape of our text. But we can take that stage further where we could look at using the Distort tool. So let's just undo all of those changes just to get it back into the state that we had it to begin with. And so with our text selected, let's come over to Transform Objects, and we're going to look at the Distort Selected Objects tool. So in here we've got various options that will enable us to distort our selection or our text that we've got here. So we're going to look at all of these options. Now the first option we have is the bounding box. So let's have a look at what this is. So if we make sure we have bounding box selected, and you'll see that I have a check mark here telling me that the vectors that we've got selected are valid for us to distort within a bounding box. So let's go ahead and press apply. And so now we can see we've got our bounding box visible there. We're also in node edit mode, and the reason for that is we need to be in node edit mode to actually make the transformations to the shape of our bounding box. Okay, you'll also notice that this option is now highlighted, edit envelope, and this is basically what we're about to do. So we're going to use a standard node editing options to change the shape of our bounding box. So we're just going to take this node here and I'm just going to drag that up like so. You'll see it's automatically updated the text inside to fit to our newly shaped bounding box. I can bring that down. Again, you'll see it's done the same again, it's filled that space. So you can see how we can really make changes to the way our text looks. As I said, we use the standard node editing tools. So what I could do here is I could right click on this span. Okay, I could look at changing it to a Bezier arc, or I could insert a point. So I could insert a point like so, or press I on the keyboard. That's the keyboard shortcut to insert a point. And then I could move this like so. I could also make use of the actual midpoints of a span, so I could just take that, pull that down, and if I wanted to I could change the state of the node. So I right click on that straight point, we could turn that into a smooth point if we wanted to, where we could use the handles to really alter the spans there. And you'll see that we're constantly getting an update of how our text fits within the actual edited box itself. So one thing to note here is once you're happy with the distortion, how you've edited the envelope, you can just simply close that down and you'll notice that we no longer have a solid outline of text. Okay, so if I come out there and I select it, you'll see that what we've got here is no longer a text entity. So if I go back into draw text, you'll see the software no longer recognises the Vectric word as a text entity. And the reason for that is that we've saved the object from a state of text to a state of distortion. And so with this still being in a state of distortion, we can go back into Distort Selected Object, where we're able to edit the envelope, and you'll see it's remembered the envelope that we edited there. I can make further changes to it if I wanted to. And then once you're finally happy with your envelope, the way that we've distorted our text, simply use the option here to bake the distortion. Then we could close that down and you'll see now that we can access each of these individual letters as separate vectors. And so now we're going to look at how we can distort text between two curves. So let's just box select these vectors to highlight them all, press delete on the keyboard. I'm going to go back into the draw text option, again the word Vectric, font Arial, height is going to be 3 inches, press apply, close that down. I'm going to take that and I'm just going to position that somewhere at the bottom there. So now I'm going to look at drawing a curve. So to do that we're going to use the draw arc option, and I'm just simply going to put a point in there, put a point in here, create quite a shallow arc there, close that down. I want to just nudge that up a little bit, so I'm just going to use the arrow keys. And then with that selected, let's come over to mirror selected objects. Okay, so we want to flip about job center, create a mirrored copy, and we're going to flip that vertically, and then we can close that down. And so now I have all of the parts that I need in order for me to distort the Vectric text between these two curves. So let's just go into the distort tool. So I'm going to select my text first, then we're going to select the bottom line next. So I'm going to hold down Shift, select that one next, and last we're going to select the top curve, so Shift and select that one. And if we use this option here between two curves, you'll see we have a check sign saying that I'm able to distort this text between the two curves that I've got selected, in which case we could just go ahead and press apply. And so you'll see it's distorted our text between the two curves that we had selected. You'll also notice that we are in edit envelope mode, and so I could further edit this if I wanted to. For example, I could take this point here and just increase that curve or decrease that like so. and you'll see that we're distorting it without actually affecting the curves that we used as a start point to distort our text between the two curves. And so that's really handy if you wanted to edit the actual curvature but without editing the actual vectors themselves. So let's just close that down, and now we'll look at just undoing those operations to put it back to its original state. So this time we're going to look at how we can use the same tool to distort between two curves, except this time we're going to look at distorting between two varied curves. So I'm just going to look at taking this vector here, and we're going to go into node edit mode. Okay, and then here I'm just going to right click, I'm just going to make this a Bezier line, and then I'm just going to right click to insert a point here, and then I'm also going to look at right clicking to insert a point here. We could look at editing the curvature, so I've got something a little bit more interesting there. Then we're just going to go back into normal selection mode. I'm going to delete this vector here. I'm going to take this newly edited vector, and we're going to go into mirror selected objects. I'm going to flip that vertically about job center, where we're going to create a mirrored copy. And then with that newly created vector, just going to undraw, create a mirrored copy, and we're just going to use the option here to flip horizontally, and then we can close that down. So let's go back into the distort tool. So we're going to use the distort option, select the text first, shift and select the bottom line second, shift and select the top line last. Use the option between two curves. Software's telling me, yep, we can do that. Press apply, and you'll see it will distort the text between the two curves that we used there. You'll also notice that our text is actually not as we were expecting it. We can see it's actually backwards. And the reason for that is all down to the start point on the bottom curve that we're using. So we can see the start point here, represented by this green node, is on the right hand side. Therefore our text is going to start from that point also. So what we need to do is we need to change the start point of the bottom line so that it's at this point here, travelling from left to right. So to do that, what we need to do is just come out of here, close that down. Let's just undo that distortion. Select this bottom curve here, into node edit mode, right click on this node, use the option here, make start point. I can see we're now travelling from left to right. So now we can go back into the distort tool, select my text, shift, select the bottom, shift, select the top, between two curves, press apply. And now we can see that our text is flowing from left to right as it should. That's all down to us changing the start point there. So now we're in edit envelope mode. I can just make further edits to our envelope without actually affecting the curves that we used to create that distortion. So if you're happy with that, you could go ahead and bake that distortion, and then we could just close to come out of the distort tool. And so that really completes this guide on how to create and edit text in the software. There are many tutorials available that cover some of the tools that we've looked at in this session in actual working projects. You can find some of these in the related videos.